So I'm Dr. Daniel Lemley. I'm a postdoc, or I'm an NRF postdoc, but also through the Shallow Water Ecosystem Chair. My main focus is estuarine water quality and ecology, specifically looking at topics of eutrophication and harmful algal blooms and what the effects of these are on the environment in general, and ultimately the risk that that poses to humans and animal wildlife. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the issue of water quality in estuaries and coastal waters and what drives that, or drives those changes in water quality. One of the most pressing in terms of our water quality is the overload of nutrients into our estuaries and rivers, and this ultimately causes eutrophication. And what eutrophication is basically an oversupply of anthropogenic, so human-based nutrient pollution, and then those nutrients ultimately cause excessive growth of primary producers, such as macroalgae, phytoplankton, and then when this happens, basically the entire ecosystem shifts and you can get undesirable disturbances to the ecosystem food web and the structure thereof. Some of the consequences of eutrophication, obviously it starts with a bloom of microalgae or macroalgae. What this does is there's then an excess amount of organic load in the system, and this can drive things such as hypoxia, can change your food web structure, and ultimately in very bad instances it can result in dead zones and fish kills and those sort of things. In South Africa, we are becoming now more aware of these impacts in our estuaries. We have done quite a lot of research here on the south coast in the vicinity of Nelson Mandela University, and this has mostly been in the Sundays and Swartkops estuaries. These have two sort of different pressures, but they ultimately have a similar response. So in the Swartkops, it's a very highly urbanized estuary system, and in the Sundays, the main pressure is agriculture. But ultimately what it means is both of these systems get too much nutrients, and this results in harmful algal blooms. We've done extensive research in both systems showing the effect that these blooms have, one on the water quality itself, excessive changes in oxygen going from supersaturated to hypoxic, and then we've also shown that these have quite drastic effects on the higher trophic levels, including larval fish and even the large fish themselves, such as mullet. And all of this means basically that the nursery function of these estuaries has diminished quite substantially. We've also done quite a lot of research along the KZN coast, where the estuaries are a little bit different. They tend to be smaller perch systems, and the main sort of pressures up on the KZN coast is the multitude of wastewater treatment works that are present. I think there are over 20 estuaries or small temporary closed systems that have wastewater treatment works entering them. And then there's also the pressure of sugarcane and agriculture. On the west coast, where it gets a bit drier, things get a little bit more complex. The main issue there is not so much an excessive amount of nutrients, but it's basically the unavailability of fresh water, except for your big systems, maybe like Olifants and Bergs, where the catchments are quite large. But for a lot of the other estuaries, it becomes then an issue about freshwater availability. So any change, even something that's a pressure that's smaller, would have maybe a larger effect on the west coast. And talking about harmful algal blooms specifically, one of the main species that we've dealt with or sort of identified is Heterosigma akashiwa. It's a rhaphodophyte, and it's a highly successful blooming species globally, and it's also showing, especially on the south coast of South Africa, becoming quite a problem and nuisance species. It's not necessarily directly toxic, so it doesn't necessarily accumulate toxins in the food web. However, its main sort of thing is that it can grow very fast, changes the oxygen conditions drastically, and it produces quite a lot of mucus when it's in the blooming phase. And this mucus has been shown to sort of interfere with the gill functioning of larval and adult fish. And we've had fish kills now in the Swartkops at least, I think it's 2 or 3 occasions now. And this is directly linked to massive blooms of Heterosigma itself. So I suppose the question is, what do we do about this? How do we stop this from happening? And the most important thing is to sort of address the issue at the source. There are no magic solutions. Ultimately, it takes a catchment to coast approach. and this involves sort of role playing between all the different stakeholders. So ultimately, we need to have a reduction in our nutrients in the system. This needs to be done in a managed and coordinated way. I know it is a very difficult thing to sort of move wastewater outflow or change how agriculture happens, but there are a variety of different management practices that can be implemented. And this includes the restoration of riparian habitats, the use of artificial wetlands, the reuse of wastewater for sort of non-consumptive purposes, and all of this, it won't have a quick change, but it is something that is necessary now before our systems get to the point where they can no longer function properly. And this has knock-on effects not only for our estuarine and tourism sector, but it will also have impacts when it comes to the marine environment and the fishery sector. So yes, it is eutrophication, and water quality is a pressing issue in South Africa, and it's something that does require more attention. Thank you.